For 2,000 years, Christians have been approaching each other after the event we're talking about today, and they would say this: He is risen. Okay, that might have been the weakest one in 2,000 years. So let's try it again. He is risen. That's more like it. You can have a seat. Isn't it amazing that all over the world today, on the same day, more people than you could ever count are celebrating the same exact thing, are acknowledging the same exact thing, this historical fact that happened about 2,000 years ago. We're going to get to that in a minute. And you know, I was thinking about all the different parts of the resurrection story that I could share with you today. There's so much to it that I would love to tell you, and I can't share all of it. But the fact that he defeated the grave, the fact that death has been conquered, it's just an amazing thing. And there were these two guys. This happened after the resurrection. And they were walking along this road. We call it the road to Emmaus. They were on their way to this place called Emmaus. And this was after the resurrection, so after Jesus was back. And let me just read this part to you, and then we're going to talk about it. This is found in Luke chapter 24, if you want to turn there, starting in verse 13. It says, "Now that same day, Resurrection Sunday, that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, 'What are you discussing together as you walk along?' They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, 'Are you only a visitor to Jerusalem and do not know the things that have happened here in these days?' 'What things?' Jesus asked. That's so funny to me. 'Well, about Jesus of Nazareth,' they replied. 'He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what's more, it's the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. And then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said. But him they did not see.' Verse 25, he said to them, 'How foolish are you, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter glory?' And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus acted as if he were going farther, but they urged him strongly, 'Stay with us, for it's nearly evening, the day's almost over.' So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, 'Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?' They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, 'It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon.' Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread." So these two guys are walking along the road on their way to this place called Emmaus. And it says their faces were downcast. And all of a sudden they stood still and they stopped. Why did they stop? Why were they sad? They were sad because of the events that had happened. That, well, Jesus died. We thought he was something. We thought he was the one that maybe was going to redeem us and save everything. And now he's dead. So they're sad. They're downcast. And they stopped because they were stunned when Jesus said, "Well, what happened?" That anybody wouldn't know what was going on. Obviously, he knew what was going on above all people. And you know, when I read that, it's an amazing thing how quickly we can go to a place of downcast. I don't know if you've been there, but life's going along and everything seems smooth and you feel like you get it. And then all of a sudden, your circumstances change. Something happens around you, something happens in your life, and all of a sudden, it's as if the floor just fell out from beneath you. What you expected to happen didn't happen. How you thought life was going to go or was supposed to go, it went a different way. You lost somebody, or you lost something, or something really challenging happened in the life of somebody that you love, and all of a sudden, you go from this place of everything's good to, man, I'm just downcast. So these two were downcast, and they walked along this road, and in that situation, Jesus comes up alongside them, and he comes to lift their perspective. He comes to take them on a different journey to a place that maybe they were supposed to go, but they hadn't ended up there yet. To inform their understanding, to change, not the situation that they found themselves in, because the facts are still the facts, but to bring to light some new information that would change the conclusions that they came to. Here's one of the big truths that I want to share with you from the resurrection story today. It's something that applies to all of us, and it's very hard for us to get, even as Christians. The circumstances that you face are not nearly as important as the conclusions you draw. They're not nearly as important. So you can be walking along, and these circumstances happen in your life, and it just really throws you off. You have a choice of what conclusions you're going to draw based on what happened. And that's kind of what's happening here. See, the problem here is not what happened. Jesus had died. That's a fact. The problem was they had drawn a conclusion that isn't based in reality, the fact that, well, now he's back. They missed that part. And so let me show you what Jesus does here, first of all. So he does this thing that we can all learn from. He doesn't just step in right away like many of us Christians do and give them the answer to their problem. He doesn't just jump in aggressively and say, well, I have the truth. Let me tell you where you're off. First, it says he actually walks alongside them for quite a while. This is a 7-mile journey. And they're walking along, and he's listening. He's just listening to their heart. He's listening to their problem. He's hearing the words that come out of their mouth. And I think as Christians, especially, guys, those of us who are, in a culture that we live in right now that's so polarized and so divisive, I think that many of us could do a better job at just walking alongside people and hearing the words and seeing what they're feeling and meeting them where they're at before we try to offer all the answers right off the bat. We can learn from that. When somebody's grieving, learn to listen to them. Learn to walk alongside them instead of just giving them the truth right away as if that's going to help in that moment. It says it was a 7-mile distance they had to travel. So who knows how long they'd been walking already before Jesus had stopped listening and said, okay, now, because he does this too, let me challenge you. And let me bring you back into reality. Which I guess is another lesson because they didn't even know who he was in this moment, right? They hadn't recognized him yet. And I was thinking about how many of us don't even really know what's inside of a person who's just 6 feet away from us. Like you can be looking across this aisle right now at somebody who's really different from you and have no clue what's actually going on inside of them, have no idea what they're walking through or where they've been. The person you see 6 feet away from you at the grocery store this week, you have no idea what's inside of them. The server at the restaurant, we could go down the list. You don't know what's inside of somebody, and so many of us just judge somebody from the outside. I mean, talk about judging someone from the outside. This is Jesus. And they just saw this random guy. And one of them even says, you haven't heard what happened? You have no idea, really? Seriously? You haven't heard the news? They're saying to Jesus, how uninformed are you? Like, don't you watch CNN? Don't you know the truth, Like, you haven't heard the big events that happened on this day? And he challenges them. It's like, he's like, what happened? They're like, you don't know about Jesus? And he's like, who's he? Like, so comical. And so the point, though, is we must never assume when we're talking to somebody or walking alongside somebody that we know exactly who they are or what's inside of them. And so here's the thing that Jesus then does, though, after he listens, after he walks with them for a while, he does this thing that we also need to be a part of. He challenges them. He challenges them. He challenges their assumptions. And that's what Jesus will do. So the conclusion that they drew from this whole thing is that, hey, this is the end of the line. I mean, Jesus is dead. He's gone. That's it. Why were they headed to Emmaus? They were headed to Emmaus because the party in Jerusalem was over. They thought there was going to be this power. They thought that there was going to be this redemption that came from Jesus, that he was the guy, and now they're realizing, man, it's not what we had hoped for. Did you see that language, by the way? When these guys talked to Jesus, they used this past tense language constantly. They said, we had hoped he was the one. We had hoped he would redeem us. We had hoped that he was a prophet, but now he's dead. Past tense. It's used 3 different times in that passage. In other words, these guys thought that the best days were behind them. They thought that it's over. They thought there's nothing to look forward to now. I mean, this guy, Jesus, he had so much potential. He was going to fulfill all this stuff that we were waiting for someone to come fulfill. He was going to save the world. He was going to do all this stuff. He was amazing. Too bad he died. But see, these 2 guys had drawn the wrong conclusion from the exact same information that other people had been given. Because they mentioned the women who went to the tomb, but unlike the women who went to the tomb, found it empty. By the way, when they went to the tomb and found it empty, you know what it says? It says the stone had been rolled away. They go in and they find the clothes Jesus had been wrapped in lying there. It says folded. Folded. Like, this isn't a man who's stressed. He gets up. He's like, what am I going to do now that I'm back? I'm going to make my bed and walk out of here nonchalantly because there's other things I have to do. See, the resurrection was the start of something where Jesus would actually now walk around and show himself to people, eyewitnesses who would then record it for quite a few days. It wasn't resurrection, go back to heaven. There was a whole thing that happened after that some of us fail to read and understand. That's not the end of the story, it's the beginning of the story. But this past tense thing, a lot of us do that with our life. Well, my best days are behind me. I wish I could go back to the glory days. My career was, we use that past tense language, my relationships were feeling like there's nothing good in front of us. And for the Christian, I'm going to get to this in a second, the best is always in front of you. It's always in front of you, whether on this side of eternity or the other. And that's what you get to hold on to. And so the question when you're dealing with something difficult in your life is, what conclusion are you coming to? What conclusion are you coming to? Because I'm going to share the hope that you need to hear in a minute, and you don't want to miss that. It's critical that you hear it. These 2 were suffering under the weight of a story that simply wasn't true. They had drawn some conclusions, but they weren't the right conclusions, even though they were given the same exact information. And so it's painful. It was bad. It was hard for them. And so Jesus gets to step into the picture and say, hey, here's the deal. I know that I was dead. I know that that's what you saw. But newsflash, now I'm alive. Now I'm alive. I'm back. And so I wonder if you've been using that past tense and it's time to let go of that. And so once their assumptions were challenged, once they began to think correctly, because listen, wrong thinking will always lead to wrong living. That's how it works. When you see things inaccurately, it leads to you living your life in a way that is not accurate. And so if you inaccurately see a situation that's happening and you're hurt by it and nobody brings you into the reality of it, then you're going to live the wrong way in that relationship. If you're given inaccurate information about some things that are happening in the world and then you have unnecessary fear, that's not a good way to live. You have to get the right thinking in your mind in order to do that. You can't always control in life what happens. I don't know if you've learned that yet, but it's true. But here's the thing you can control. You can control the conclusions that you draw from it. You're able to do that. And so, perspective. Jesus came to give them a new perspective. And perspective is the thing in the Christian life that actually unlocks potential. It unlocks potential. So you're wondering why certain things aren't going the way you need them to go. You're wondering why you're not producing fruit in your life or whatever it might be. And it's like, sometimes it's because your perspective needs to change. And the thing that you're going to learn about Jesus as you begin to follow him more intimately is the real Jesus, not the Jesus you make up in your head, not the Jesus that you hope he will be or wished he was, but the real Jesus. He will always challenge you. And I would even go so far as to say bluntly, if you are following a Jesus or a picture of Jesus that doesn't challenge you regularly, you're probably not following or worshiping the real Jesus. Because he always challenges your assumptions, and he challenges your beliefs, and he challenges where you've come from, and the way that you're thinking you should live. He challenges you if he's the real Jesus. Perspective unlocks that. So let me give you an example of this from this story. These guys had been walking along, and they're doing this thing where they're saying, it's too dark out here, we can't continue on, we're going to stop. Jesus says, well, I'm going to continue. They say, no, don't continue, it's not safe. The moon is rising in the sky. It's only going to get smaller and smaller. I don't know if you know, but they didn't have street lights back then or little flashlights on their iPhones. And so it's really dark out there. And so they're doing this thing where, we have to stop. It's not safe to go on. We have to stop. Why don't you stop with us and stay with us? They didn't know who it was yet. And so eating a meal, the moon comes up, and here's what I'm trying to say. They didn't have hope yet. They were still downcast. Because did you read it? Once they understand that it was Jesus standing in front of them, oh my gosh, he's not dead, he's risen. Now, it says they go back the entire 7-mile journey right then in the dark back to Jerusalem to tell everybody what they've seen. Because hope gives you wings. Hope lets you keep going. Hope is the driving force of being able to go forward even when you're downcast. Hope's the thing that gets you over the hump. And I think that one thing that I just really wanted to challenge some of you with, all of us with, including myself, is hope is the thing that some of you are missing that you need to find. Because hope is the thing that will give you power to embrace the thing that you previously were trying to escape. So there's this thing in your life, and you can see somebody trying to get away from it constantly and trying to escape it. But the Christian, if they really understand the resurrection, if they really understand what it means for them, they're able to, that thing they were trying to escape, instead say, I'm going to embrace it and move forward. Because he gives me the power to do that. We can choose. It's not something you don't have the power to do. We can choose to draw a different conclusion than somebody else from the exact same circumstance or information. And so I would challenge some of you to stop suffering under the weight of a story that is not true. Because some of us go our whole life choosing to suffer under the weight of something that wasn't actually based in reality. I'll give you an example. There's some people, even in this room, and this isn't the PC thing to say, but it's the Bible thing to say. It's the Jesus thing to say. There are some of you in this room that will go decades suffering under the reality, your reality, that Jesus was not who he said he was, and he did not rise from the dead to bring power. Instead of allowing him to help you draw a different conclusion and show you what actually happened. I'll get to that in a minute. I have a lot to say about that. There's another truth I want to share with you really briefly from this story. There is a wrong way to read the Bible, guys. There's a wrong way. Some of us, we open the Bible and we read through the whole Old Testament without looking at it through the lens of Jesus Christ. And we miss most of it. That's what these guys had done. Because they're in this position where they've read the Old Testament, right? They've read the manuscripts, the scrolls, and they're in this place where they're like, well, I've read it. I thought Jesus was coming to redeem us, but now he's dead. But what they missed is that the stuff that had been prophesied, that we have proof was written so many years before Jesus even walked the earth, it said that actually the redemption cannot come until he dies. It was prophesied before it ever happened that it was going to happen, but they somehow missed that part because, like many of us, when they read their Bible, they don't look for Jesus in the pages. You can open your Bible and just look for, well, how do I be a better husband? How do I be a better mother? How do I fix my relationship? And you're going to find a lot of good wisdom in there when you do that. But you're going to miss the main point, which is from Genesis all the way to the end in Revelation, all of it points to Jesus Christ. And you'll find him in every single book in the Bible if that's what you're looking for when you actually read it, which is a miracle in itself. Thinking about how this was written by so many different authors on different continents and different languages, it's miraculous that it was put together in this seamless way from the original ones, unchanged, in a way that points to him every step of the way. That's a whole other sermon. I don't have time for that. So as we read the Bible, this is what Jesus did. He said, let me bring you in, guys. These guys walking along, he said, and then he explained to them all through the prophets and Moses and the Psalms. And he started to explain to them all the things that were said that they'd already read concerning himself that pointed to him. But see, the problem was these two guys walking along the road, like many of us, they wanted to see the crown put on the king's head without him having to go to the cross first. They wanted to see the crown of victory put on his head and the royal crown put on his head where he's seated at the right hand of the Father and he's actually the victor. But they forgot the part where it clearly stated that he had to suffer first and have a crown of thorns put on his head before the royal crown touched his head. And I think many of us live that way. We want the redemption without the suffering. We want the Savior to be risen without the fact that he had to be broken first. He had to go to the cross in order for him to wear the crown as king, because then people could be redeemed. And that was what the Bible said he was going to do. But they read the Bible looking for things that weren't Jesus, and so they missed him. They didn't see him. And so as we read the Bible, that's my challenge to you, is look for Jesus on every page, because you'll actually find him. And so they thought he was going to bring the kingdom, but they thought he was going to bring it their way. They thought he was a political adversary. They thought he was going to conquer Rome in a day. They thought he was going to bring a sword and be a warrior. And instead, he said, no, I came to bring that which was prophesied hundreds of years before I walked the earth. I came to bring freedom. I came to bring liberation for you and free you from bondage, but this is how it's got to go down. I have to be the innocent lamb whose blood will be shed on the cross for you. They thought he was going to bring this kingdom to them that looked like they thought the kingdom should look, but they wanted him to bring the kingdom without having to die on the cross first. Here's what I'm saying. He was not the king that they wanted, but he was the king that they needed. And some of us need to hear that too. Jesus is not necessarily the king that you want, but he's definitely the king that you need. And we can wish he was something other than what he is, or we can accept him as he is, which is exactly what you need, whether you realize it yet in this life or not. The right way to read the Bible is to look for Jesus and see him as king, and you find him all throughout. Which brings us to another truth that I want to share with you. Easter is not just meant to be a holiday that we celebrate once a year. It is meant to be an everyday reality for Christians. It's not this day that we just look forward to once a year where we celebrate and we sing different songs and we hunt for eggs and all that stuff. No, it's meant to be an everyday reality that as a Christian, you get to walk in and live in every day of your life, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. That's what it's meant to be. Not just a once a year thing on a calendar, but an everyday reality. In fact, I would go so far as to say Easter is who we are. We are people of the resurrection. We are people who walk in it and live in it daily, not just celebrate it once a year. Because I think a lot of times what we do as Christians, and hey, before I say this, none of this I'm about to say is wrong. And I do it, and we all should do it because it's important to remember all the days that led up to the cross. It's a good thing to do that, and we do it here. But at the same time, I think what a lot of us do in Christianity is we do almost this countdown timer to Easter. And so depending what kind of tradition you come from, you either start that calendar on Ash Wednesday or you start it on Palm Sunday, and then you count down the days and you say, well, on this day, Judas betrayed him, and on this day, he was taken away, and on this day, right? And you go through the things, and then on Friday, he hung on the cross, and on Saturday, everybody was lost and confused, but then we get to Sunday, and it's ground zero. We finally made it. And now we're here today on Easter Sunday, and we're celebrating it. But we have the power of the resurrection in our lives, and we have access to it every single day. And what I'm trying to tell you is that Easter Sunday was supposed to be the starting point, not the end of the countdown. Because what happens in our lives when we just treat it as a holiday is we get to Easter, and then we celebrate it, and we understand it and all this stuff, but then the next day, we go home and we put the Easter baskets and the eggs and the little green grass away in the storage tote in the garage, and we wait till next year. When what we're meant to do is see Easter Sunday as the starting point, the springboard for the days that follow it. It's day one. Did you notice that it said Jesus rose on the first day of the week? That was intentional, I believe. That was purposeful. Because what Jesus was doing here is he was resetting everything that had fallen in the world and starting that process of bringing everything that was broken back to a place of redemption, including us. Some of you say, well, I just don't know if I can believe in all this because there's trauma in this world, and there's pain in this world, and there's cancer, and there's murder, and how can you believe in all this? And it's like, because man chose to follow his own will instead of God's will. And it set the world in a broken place. That's why we call it a fallen world. And we also have this thing called free will. And Jesus isn't going to kick down the door of your heart and force himself into it. You have to invite him in. But the thing that he did by resetting the clock on Easter Sunday and starting the next part of the process was to start the process that would eventually, when Jesus comes back, redeem the whole world and bring the new heaven and the new earth. And Jesus would come back to get us. See, Jesus is the antithesis of Adam. Jesus is the one who chose the Father's will over the will of man every single time and lived a perfect life. That's who he is. And so that's why when he died, he chose to die and then come back from the dead on the first day of the week, showing that now there's someone at the helm of the universe who's going to lead it to the point where it's heading and where it's going to go, where his kingdom will reign forever. So the two guys on the road to Emmaus, these disciples, once they realized it was him and he vanished from their sight, they said, we got to get back to Jerusalem, right? We got to go tell everybody what happened. We just saw him, he's back. They just had to get back there, even in the dark. And so they get back to Jerusalem, and they find the 11 disciples that are left, and they say, hey, Jesus is alive. We just saw him. And they're like, yeah, we know. He just showed himself to Peter, too. And it's amazing. So here's Jesus showing us that Sunday was day one. The resurrection was day one, because now we got day 2 and day 3 and day 4, all the way up past 40, where he's showing himself to people and people are seeing him and he's having meals with people and he's talking to people and he's sharing more information with them, and it's this amazing thing. And I know because I hear it all the time. I know that some of you have a mindset with this whole thing of Jesus coming back eventually, where you say, well, I just wish he'd come now. I just wish he'd come sooner. But you know what? I'm really glad he waited for me to be saved. And I'm really glad he's still waiting for others to be saved before he comes back. And I'll wait as long as he wants to, because there's work to be done. He is long-suffering, that nobody would perish, because that's an invitation that's still available. I'm going to share one more thought with you, but the worship team is going to come back up here. So Easter's not a holiday, it's an everyday reality. And when you really get that up in your soul, what the resurrection means, I'm telling you, there's something that starts to be unleashed in your life. It's something that I think Christians have become bad at practicing these days. And it's something we need to get back to. It's called joy. I would argue that when you really understand the resurrection, when you really get the resurrection, which is what this day's all about, you will walk in joy. It doesn't mean pain doesn't happen. It doesn't mean there's not bad stuff that happens. It doesn't mean you're not going to have downcast days. But as an underlying current in your life, every day you're going to have this unspeakable joy and you're going to walk in it. And I know this is not a popular opinion, but I would argue that if you don't have that everyday unspeakable joy in some capacity, then you haven't really fully understood the resurrection. And that's why we're talking about it today. It's something that we need to get back to, and it starts with you understanding the resurrection. By the way, Jesus predicted this would happen. Let me take you through this little journey real quick. So John chapter 16, if you go back there, this was before Jesus went to the cross, before he died. He said to his disciples, he predicted this. He said, you will have sorrow because I'm going to die. You're going to have sorrow. Cleopas, I understand your downcastness, your sadness. You're going to have to watch me be nailed to the cross. There's going to be sorrow. But I will see you again. And that's an amazing thing if you really understand what that means. Because Jesus said to them, I'm going to die, but you will see me again. And they still didn't get it. But he said, you will see me again. And when you do, here's what it says, your heart will rejoice, and your joy that you have because of that, no one will be able to steal from you. He says, no one will be able to take away your joy once I give it to you. So Jesus said, the worst thing that could ever happen to you is going to happen. I'm going to be taken away from you. But then the best thing that could ever happen to you is going to happen. You're going to get me back. And not only are you going to get me back, but you're going to get my spirit that will stay with you for eternity. And here's the thing that I think many Christians forget. The world actually doesn't have the power to steal your joy because the world didn't give you your joy. So you're going to have days where you don't feel it. But here's the part we miss. Do you want to define words as we've interpreted them and changed them over the centuries to be, or do you want to define them how they originally were defined? Have you heard? I'm sure you've heard this about love before, right? Love is not a feeling. We talk about it that way all the time, and that's how we've come to define it in English many times. But if you go back to the original, even outside of Scripture, you go back to the original definitions of the word love, where it comes from. Love was actually never a feeling if you go back far enough. It was a decision. It was a choice. It was an action. It was a verb. Okay? And you can go back in any culture and find that. It's the same with joy, but we miss that. Well, I don't feel joy. Then choose joy. The thing that the Christian has the power to do, which I know is not easy, and we can do a whole teaching series on this, and maybe we will, because there's a lot of practical nuances to this, but the thing the Christian has the power to do that nobody else actually does is choose joy even through hardship, is walk in joy even when there's unjoyful things happening. And it doesn't mean you don't grieve, and it doesn't mean you don't experience loss, and it doesn't mean you don't hurt from the deepest parts of your soul sometimes. But underneath all of that, there is still a joy that is the level of joy that nobody can ever steal it from you. And you have it because of the resurrection. That's where it comes from. So you could say as a Christian, take my health from me. Take my home from me. Take this from me, take that from me, and I will still say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Because the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. And this prophecy, right, in John 16, I'm excited to share this part with you. John 20, when did they walk in joy? Verse 20, when he showed them his hands and his side, then the disciples were glad and they rejoiced when they saw the Lord. So here's the piece that I've been burdened to share with you today. And I say it with trembling because I realize that there's trauma, I realize there's pain, I realize there's hard things that happen in our life, and I'm not trying to minimize those, but still underneath all of that, as a Christian, joy is not just a gift that God gives us when we come to Him, it's actually our responsibility. Joy is a responsibility for the Christian. It is a command of God to walk in, and it's a choice to have that as your underlying thing. And so here's what I would say. This is a kind of joy that's unleashed on your life from being given something that can never be taken away from you. And so I've had so many times where I've stood on this stage or a previous stage for about 18 years at this point, over 120 times actually, where I stood here looking at a casket of somebody in the church family who had passed on to eternity. And I feel all the things, and I grieve and I cry with the family who lost their loved one, and that's real and that's good to grieve. But I can look at that casket, and at the same exact time as I say, this is the last time I'm going to see that person, I can also at the same time say, I'm going to see that person again. Do you feel that? You see, that's what I'm talking about. Like I'm grieving, I'm hurting, but there's still that underlying joy because of the hope that only comes from the resurrection. It just moves me because I love Jesus. I love what He's done for us. When they saw His wounds, they were glad. And you know, that reminds me, when was it Cleopas and his companion noticed that this was Jesus? Verse 35, it was when He broke the bread. They couldn't see under the nightfall, or maybe Jesus did this thing and made it so they couldn't see Him. I don't know how it worked, but then when they're in the room and He breaks the bread and they see the holes in His hands and they recognize who He is. And that's so symbolic to me because something you need to understand as a Christian, even though it might have been preached differently to you before, it's not what the book says. Here's what the book says. Blessing and brokenness actually go together. They go together. And I know there's some people who will tell you in Christianity, give your life to Jesus and everything's perfect and you'll be rich and healthy forever. And that's not what the Bible actually says. And that is a false teaching. Because the bread was broken as He blessed it, and He was broken in order to bless us. And I could take you through the whole of Scripture and show you that blessing and brokenness go together. And by the way, the greater the brokenness, the greater the blessing on the other side. The greater the suffering sometimes, the greater the testimony that you have to influence other people as a Christian. And when you can see the holes in his hands and see that though he was taken from you by death, he's now been given back to you, and you really get that, it opens you up to a whole new kind of joy. It's not just a gift given to us, it is a responsibility if you're a Christian to learn to walk in joy. Any Chronicles of Narnia fans in here? Quite a few. So if you don't know, there was a man from a while ago named C.S. Lewis, and he was a very intelligent man, an Oxford scholar, in fact. And he was an atheist, didn't believe in any of this stuff that we're talking about today. And he decided to look into it from a logical, intelligent standpoint. And he looked at the evidence, and he investigated, and what he discovered was that undeniable in any way, shape, or form, I completely believe, nobody can deny it from me, that this actually happened. That Jesus was in fact who he said he was, and he rose from the grave. That's the conclusion he came to. There's so many of those very intellectual individuals, and I could take you through their stories, who set out to look into it, thinking that they would find that, it's all bogus, and guess what? They find the opposite. That's me lovingly challenging some of you in this room, because that's the way my brain works as well, and so I get you. And so even though this is a deep-rooted heart thing for me, where I walk with Jesus every day and I feel so close to him, I've still gone on the journey of looking at the ridiculous amount of evidence there is for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. In the Chronicles of Narnia, it's a series of books, and one of the main characters is named Aslan, and he's a lion, and he's the Christ figure in the story. And in the very last book, it's called The Last Battle, when they had finally gotten through redemption and the stone table had cracked and Aslan comes back to life and he starts bringing others back to life, and he had fixed the treacherous heart of Edmund. All that needed to be done had been done. Everything that could be done had been done. You could say it was finished. Sound familiar? But the children at the end of the story, they were still downcast. They were still sad and mopey. And there's this line that I'll always remember where Aslan the lion, he says to the little boys and girls, he says, "You are not so happy as I mean you to be," based on everything that has just happened. Is it possible, church, that if Jesus were looking us in the eye right now, many of us, he would say, "Do you really understand my resurrection? Because you are not as joyful as I mean you to be." Because the great lion who died as a lamb and then came back as a lion is not worried when he watches CNN. And he's not thrown off or stressed by the things happening in the world. It burdens him. It breaks his heart like it should ours. It grieves him. But he knows where the story's going, and so should we. And we know where it ends. And everything between the resurrection and the place where it ends is just everything that's happening right now. That's where we're living right now. But we're on our way there. And just no matter what happens in the world, some of you need to hear this. No matter what happens in the world, it is not throwing off God's plan, and it's still leading us to that place. And I can't end this time without just offering you an invite. And it's an invitation to the greatest thing that some of you, any of you, will ever be invited to. Because the fact is, Jesus died for you. And he rose from the grave. And he's alive today. And I know it's cliche and it's been said for so many years, but it's so true. He stands at the door and knocks. But you have to open it and let him in. And he gives you that choice. Like I said, he's not going to kick it in. But he's knocking. And I know what some of you are thinking, and I know what some of you say, because I've heard all the arguments, and I've personally worked through all the arguments, okay? I've been through them all. You can't tell me one that I haven't heard. Talked to somebody in the last couple of weeks who said, "Well, Jared, I just can't believe that Jesus was who he says he was. I can't believe in the resurrection. I I would have had to be there like those guys and see it. And I was like, oh, really? Do you believe that George Washington walked the earth? And he said, yeah. Do you believe Hitler was a real person? Napoleon? We can go through all these historical figures. Do you believe that they were real people? Yeah, of course. I said, how do you know that? Well, because there were eyewitnesses that wrote it down. Did you know that by people that have actually studied it in depth, that the resurrection of Jesus Christ has been called one of the most attested historical facts in all of history? Because he was seen after the resurrection by over 500 people who recorded it. Did you know that? That even outside of this book, there are actual manuscripts that you can still see today. You can go see them. In fact, archaeologists have discovered over 5,700 manuscripts from that period that you can still see of people, even outside of the Bible, recording what they saw. Did you know that that's exponentially more eyewitness accounts than we have of any other figure in history, and yet you believe in all of them? Well, they don't tell you that in school, do they? You don't always get to hear those things. My challenge to you is simply to look into it. Just look, I dare you, look into it. If you look into it enough, I promise you, you will come to the same conclusion I came to. There's no way this isn't real. And you know, you could say that like, well, I have to see it though. I'm just that kind of person, I have to see it. You know, Thomas had to see it. You know Thomas from the story, and he only believed when he saw the piercings and the holes in his hands. But do you know what Jesus said to Thomas after that? He said, Thomas, I'm glad you believe, but even more blessed is the one later who believes, who hasn't seen with their physical eyes, because that actually takes faith. It doesn't take any faith, Thomas, for you. I'm right here in the flesh. You see me. I've risen. You have the easy job. But blessed is he or she who believes, who has not seen with their own eyes. So the invitation is to a life of joy, not the absence of hardship. Jesus himself said, in this life you will have trouble. But take heart, have joy, because I have overcome the world. So we're going to bow our heads, we're going to close our eyes, and Jesus, I'm just going to thank you for this part of the story that we got to work through today, for all the truth that we can pull out of there as we unpack it together. And I thank you for the resurrection. I thank you that you're alive so that I could really live. Just for a moment, guys, with our eyes closed, with our heads bowed, I just want to invite you. I just want to invite you to something that is beyond anything that you ever imagined. Because he knocks on the door and he says, I want to come in. And so if there's any of you in this room that want to say, yeah, I'm going to open the door. Those of you watching online right now, I want to open the door. And I want to finally let him in. Would you just lift your hand for a second? Let me know. It's awesome. That never gets old to me, because that means people are going to cross from death to life. So let me lead you in a prayer. And the exact words of this prayer aren't the part that matters. What matters is that you mean it in your heart. And at Rise Church, we like to all pray out loud together for the sake of those who are praying this for the first time. And it goes something like this. Jesus, I know I've fallen short, but I believe that you died for me and that you rose again. So I give you my life. Come into my heart. Be my Lord. Be my Savior. Be my King. I confess you with my mouth, and I believe in my heart. Fill me with your Spirit, that I could live in the power of the resurrection. during this last song, there are several different ways that you can respond to Jesus, okay? If you gave yourself to Christ in that moment just now, there's going to be some ministry team members up here who they would love just to pray over you. Some of you might want to just come forward and get prayer in general for something going on in your life. They would love to pray for you. We believe in prayer around here. We see it work all the time. If you don't want to do that, there's a card in front of you. We'd love for you to just fill that out and use that as a way to let us know that you decided to surrender to Jesus today. We'd just love to walk with you. There's a family here that would love to welcome you into the family and do this with you because you're not meant to do it alone. There's also going to be some ushers that come, and for those who are new to this whole church thing, you're going to see them passing these buckets, and that's going to seem kind of weird to you. But what also might seem kind of weird to you is what I'm about to say, which is if you're visiting with us today, if you're a guest here, if you're new to all this, I am telling you from up here, let that pass by. Don't put anything in it. That's not for you. Your gift to us is simply your presence, and we're just glad that you're here. But this is something that we do as a church family every Sunday because it's an act of worship for us, of surrendering something to God, and it supports the ministry that God's doing here. But if you're visiting, you just let that pass by. Don't let it make you feel awkward. That's not for you. And then if you'd stand with me, church, this song is such a powerful way, I think, to end Easter Sunday together, because what you'll find if you become part of this church family is that we are a group of people who are all about Jesus Christ. And we believe that He alone is worthy, that He has the name that is above every name. And we will always praise Him. And we will always surrender to His will, not human will. And we mess up sometimes, and you'll find that out if you're part of our family. But we always want to do things His way every chance we get. So let's leave this place today after having sung of His worthiness, honoring Him, glorifying Him. Jesus, we exalt You to the highest place, and we lift up Your name. And all the church said.